What fact really puts the scale of time into an insane perspective? Story 1. The vast majority of us will be entirely forgotten within 3 generations of our death, or roughly 150 years. In other words, our great grandchildren, if we have them, will know very little, if anything, about us, with a few exceptions, of course. Our great great grandchildren, again, if we have them, may never even know our names. This is why people who are remembered and talked about 100s, or even 1000s of years after their deaths, must have been truly remarkable people. Our lives are but a tiny blip, barely a visible, very short lived spark on the radar of time. Story 2. This isn't exactly the same as the question you asked, but it's always mind blowing to me that humans, as in Homo sapiens, have existed for roughly 200,000 years. We developed writing within the last 10K. So we have recorded roughly 2% of all human existence. The other 98% is lost. Humans have a 500-century-long history in Australia. Of that, we can fit all the knowledge of the first 497 centuries in a few pages. We know those 497 centuries so badly that it is possible that there are really 650 centuries of prehistory. Think about that. We may be off by 30%. Just about the only thing we do know is a few records written by people after 1788, capturing what occurred right before then, and inference from what was seen right after. Everything that happened in those missing 10,000 S of years is gone forever. Story 3. I like to think this. You know those time lapses during David Attenborough's documentaries, especially of plants, trees, and fungi growing? That could very well be their perception of time. Those trees that are thousands of years old probably perceive time very quickly. Another one I think about are the Voyagers in space right now. They are going at about 35,000 miles per hour in space and are the farthest objects we have ever sent. It will take another 40,000 Earth years until it reaches the next closest star. 40,000 years sounds like a lot, but really that's the only relative time we know. If there exists other intelligent life in space, our Earth year is just an arbitrary time perception. Shoot, even though light is the fastest thing in the universe, it is relatively slow in terms of theoretical space travel. Story 4. There's caves with paintings inside them that are thousands of years apart. The one I remember had one from 30,000 BCE at one end of the cave, and on the other side of the cave, there was a painting from 25,000 BCE. There were paintings from all time periods in between as well. This means that people had lived in that cave for at least 5,000 years. Nothing changed for 5,000 years. 300 years ago, almost everyone was a farmer living out in the countryside, and it had been that way for thousands of years before that. The world changed very slowly. It took another 100 years for that to change completely, with most people now living in cramped cities. 100 years after that, we tamed our world and explored all of the land and harvested its resources. 50 years after that, we had commercial flight, radio, atomic bombs, TV. 30 years later, we had mobiles, DVDs, personal computers, video games. Now we have remote control drones, instant communication around the globe, robots that save lives. The world has always been changing, but the speed at which it has been changing has been increasing, and the rate of increase is also increasing. Maybe the world will change so fast eventually that we won't be able to keep up. Story 5. There are open and operating taverns in Europe that are older than the US. The pyramids are so old that there was more time between construction of some of them and Cleopatra than there is between Cleopatra and us. The T-Rex and Stegosaurus never walked the planet together. In fact, there's more time between the extinction of one and the emergence of the other than there is between the extinction of the T-Rex and us. Story 6. Star Wars came out mere months after the last person to die by guillotine was executed. Oh, and YouTube only got 18 this year, and calculus wasn't taught at Oxford in the first years because it didn't exist. Oxford is older than calculus. The computer which landed Apollo 11 on the moon had less computing power than a regular calculator does today. A regular calculator, not even a fancy scientific one. In the turning years from the 50s to the 60s, the world population stood at 3 billion. 4 billion was reached in the midst of the 1970s, and 5 billion in the higher 80s. 6 billion fell in 99, and shortly after 2010 we reached 7 billion. As of June 2021, the world population stands at 7.9 billion people. Story 7. Here's a scale from an old geology text. Look at the back of your hand. Anyone will do. The base of your wrist is pre-Cambrian epoch, 570 million years ago, when life started to form on Earth. Go upward from across the back of your hand. That's the time of mountain building and erosion. At the first knuckle of your middle finger, dinosaurs appear. They die out by the middle knuckle of your finger. More erosion happens, and the geoactivity of Earth settles down a bit. At the tip of your middle fingernail is us, and a stroke of a nail file would wipe out human history. Story 8. I don't know exactly where I got this from. Might have been that show, Mankind, the Story of All of Us. Not sure, though. But basically, it said that if we took the timeline of the Earth and replicated it into a 24-hour day, in 10 hours, finally our atmosphere would significantly increase in oxygen, providing base for life. Little before 19 hours would be the first plant life. After 21 hours would be first animal. Little under 23 hours would be dinosaurs. In less than a minute, the first genus of Homo appears. And in the last 10 seconds is us, Homo sapiens, modern humans. I found this so fascinating. Story 9. For most purposes of measurement of human lifespan, a generation is taken to mean 20 years. Yes, a lifespan is approximately 70 years, but that's a different thing than what I'm talking about here. A generation is the time from birth to the average age of the first child, rounded to a nice, easy-to-use number. Your average century would have 5 generations: the kids, the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and a quickly diminishing population of great-great-grandparents. Remember, we're working with average here. Think about how old your grandparents are, their parents' parents. Got it? Good. Now hold on to that. 200,000 years ago, there were 200,000 generations. The most anyone has ever seen is 5 generations. This isn't likely to change soon unless we figure out a way to stop aging or a practical application of time travel or something. The extinction event, which killed off the dinosaurs, was 65 million years ago. 500 million years ago. Someone please correct me, this is from memory and I'm on my phone. Was the Great Oxygenation Event, which started an ice age, which ended 99% of all life on Earth. Before that was 300 million years or so of single-celled life. I'm not going any further back, but it's fun if you remember that there's 1,000 million in a billion, and the universe is understood to be 13.5 billion years old. Just remember that 100 years is 5 generations. Story 10. Not really time more combinations or permutations, but it was something like if you could shuffle a deck of cards in a minute, then the time it would take to get the same deck twice, overall, not in a row, would be much longer than the time needed to. Take Pebble and put it in the Grand Canyon. Once the Grand Canyon is filled, take a little bit of rock of Mount Everest and clear the Grand Canyon. Once Mount Everest is flattened, take a drop of water from the ocean, reset the Grand Canyon, and Everest keep going until the ocean is drained. That's not exactly it, but it should be pretty close. Story 11. JFK's speech at Rice Stadium in 1962. Condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half century. We know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then, about 10 years ago, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year, and then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. And now, if America's new spacecraft succeeds in reaching Venus, we will have literally reached the stars before midnight tonight. I apologize for the incredibly long quote, but I think it really puts some things in perspective. Story 12. Maybe a little outside the topic, but still very relevant to the scale of time. Just recently, someone I know passed away in their very early 50s, and it was almost without warning, and health declined fast. It made me realize that all the time we do have is precious, and we never know when the last thing we said to someone is the last thing that we will say and they get to hear. Our time here, even those that live to be in their 90s, is short in comparison to the age of the Earth. Story 13. The universe is billions of years old, and human life is around 80 years old. You don't have long to do anything. By the time you're in your 60s, you're wondering where all the time went. Our minds are stuck in the present, trapped to remember with a blur and to move forward from it. You think you have all this time when you're young, but you don't, because when you are finally in your old age, you will still feel the same, but with the knowledge that you are old. You die before you even get a chance to live. Story 14. Matter and space will collect, growing larger and larger, compressing tighter and tighter, until eventually becoming a burning ball of fusion. It will emit light for a very, very long time. It will eventually run out of fuel and die, possibly becoming a black hole. The span of time from start to finish is not infinite, but it is just maddeningly long. And all that often happens before that light ever reaches Earth. The light will start, continue, and finally stop arriving over the same length of time during which it was created, but shifted into the past. Look up and know that you are looking back. Story 15. I've been doing some independence learning here and there. To the ancient Romans, the Great Pyramid of Giza was already ancient to those living in the Roman Empire, even the kingdom. But that's nothing. By the time the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed, the ancient civilization of Sumeria was around for 1,000 to 500 years. Probably an exaggeration, but it's around 500 years. I used to believe, stupidly, that anything beyond the Hellenistic period was nothing except cavemen and tribes, which started at 323 BC. The Sumerians existed between 4,500 to 1900 BC. My short comment probably made things incorrect and probably is, but I'd recommend on learning history. It's really interesting and fun to learn about humanity's earliest known civilization and everything above. Due to this, I see when Napoleon was alive and establishing the French Empire through one V4S as something recent. Story 16. One historical fact that really messes with my perception of time is the realization that human civilization has been around for thousands of years. When you consider the fact that people have been living, working, and creating for millennia, it can be difficult to wrap your head around the idea that our own lifetimes are just a tiny blip on the timeline of history. For example, the pyramids of Egypt, which were built around 2500 BC, are almost 5,000 years old. That means that they were constructed over 1,000 years before the Roman Empire and over 4,000 years before the modern era. It's hard to comprehend the vastness of time and the fact that we are just a small part of a much larger story. Story 17. A Christmas Carol is as old as the fax machine. The fax machine is a creation of the 1980s, according to most people. However, the first electric printing telegraph was invented in 1843 by Alexander Bain, a Scottish inventor. Charles Dickens was engaged in authoring A Christmas Carol nearby at the same time. Who would have guessed that Ebenezer Scrooge would outlive the fax? Story 18. Relatively recently, Willem de Kooning and Salvador Dali passed away. It would be difficult to lecture art history without bringing up The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali. The same might be said for the Woman series by Willem de Kooning. The early painters now appear less like modern celebrities and more like historical characters. You may be surprised to hear that de Kooning lived until 1997, while Dali only passed away in 1989, the year Weekend at Bernie's debuted. If the abstract expressionist believed Jack may have been on the door of Titanic, you're undoubtedly dying to know. However, the painter never watched the film unless James Cameron handed him an early edit. Titanic didn't open in theaters until the end of the year, and he died in March. Story 19. When Walt Disney debuted his cartoons, the Ottoman Empire was still in existence. We have discussed a few topics that began earlier than you may have imagined. Let's move on to two that went much longer than you might think. The Ottoman Empire is Exhibit A. The empire was founded about 1299 by Osman I, but it wasn't until Suleiman the Magnificent took control in the middle of the 16th century that it truly reached its peak. The year 1453, when Ottoman armies took Constantinople and thus ended the Byzantine Empire, is also frequently linked to the Ottoman Empire. However, the 1600s, 1700s, and even 1800s did not see the end of the Ottoman Empire. When Walt Disney published his first animated cartoons in 1920, it was still in existence. During World War I, the Ottoman army fought alongside the Central Powers, suffered devastating losses, and later turned over the majority of its territory to the Allied powers. The exact year the empire ended is usually given as 1922, when Turkish rulers permanently abolished the Sultan title. Story 20. It's possible that certain Greenland sharks that are still alive today existed before Henry VIII was crowned King of England. To ascertain the ages of Greenland sharks, researchers radiocarbon dated tissue taken from their eyes in a 2016 study. The oldest, a female that was about 16 and a half feet long, was thought to be 392 years old, give or take 120 years. Assume the shark was a lively 272 years old on the conservative end of the scale. She would have been older than several of the founding fathers, having been born in 1744. On the other extreme, she would be 512 years old, having been born in 1504. It was around 5 years before Henry VIII's coronation as King of England. Sharks that existed before the United States, indeed before any of the contemporary nations in the Americas, may still be found swimming in the water today. Story 21. There were several living woolly mammoths when the Giza pyramids were being built. You might believe that woolly mammoths lived in a world where people had not yet established themselves, if the majority of your information about them comes from Ice Age films. By the time civilizations were large and well organized enough to construct structures like the pyramids, the long-tusked relatives of elephants had undoubtedly long since vanished. Get ready to modify your mental image. The three principal pyramids of Giza, Egypt, were built somewhere between 2550 and 2490 BCE. Of course, the majority of woolly mammoths had already gone extinct some 10,000 years prior. However, bones discovered on Wrangel Island in Siberia were only thought to be 3,700 years old. Therefore, in the 1600s BCE, 9 centuries after the Egyptians began construction on the pyramids, some woolly mammoths were still alive. Story 22. Seeing the Giza pyramids being built was a far cry from Cleopatra's dream of possessing an iPhone. Furthermore, Cleopatra most certainly did not attend any groundbreaking ceremonies for that construction project in 2550 BCE. It would be another 2480 years before Egypt's most famous queen was born, in 69 or 70 BCE. To put it another way, she is around 400 years closer to our time than she was when she witnessed the construction of the pyramids. A few methods to put that into perspective are as follows. First, Cleopatra thought the pyramids were about as old as Socrates is to us. Second, in a way, she was closer to owning an iPhone than she was to witnessing incomplete pyramids in Giza. Story 23. Between the eras of the Stegosaurus and the Tyrannosaurus rex, you can fit all of human history, and then some. When it comes to dinosaurs, our propensity to group together vast portions of history is never more evident. It's simple to believe that all of our favorite extinct land, air, and marine creatures coexisted until they were all killed out in a single blow by that notorious meteor. It didn't work out that way. For instance, the Stegosaurus existed between 159 and 144 million years ago, during the late Jurassic period. About 68 million years ago, during the final stages of the late Cretaceous epoch, the Tyrannosaurus rex made its appearance. You could fit the entire history of humanity, including the millions of years that our early predecessors inhabited, into the space between the two dinosaurs, around 12 times over. Therefore, you should find it quite archaic to see a T-Rex hunting down a Stegosaurus. Technically, there are more than one illustration where a T-Rex holds a Tamagotchi in its small talons. Story 24. Homo sapiens do not appear until December 31st on the cosmic calendar, which begins with the Big Bang. Carl Sagan developed the cosmic calendar, which compresses the entire history of the universe into a single calendar year. In his 1977 book, The Dragons of Eden, as a means for us mere mortals to understand our place in such a vast time frame. If the Big Bang occurred on January 1st, which is actually about 13.8 billion years ago, then people didn't emerge until December 31st, not even in the morning either. Astrophysicist Ethan Siegel claims that late September is when the first life on Earth appeared on the cosmic calendar. On December 2nd, the first reproducing organism, a single-celled eukaryote, appeared. It wasn't until December 17th that the last non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. At approximately 11:48 p.m. on December 31st, Homo sapiens made their appearance. It wasn't until around 12 seconds before the new year that we invented the wheel and writing. Story 25. In 2020, the widow of a Civil War soldier passed away. The American Civil War isn't exactly considered to have occurred a long time ago on the cosmic calendar, and perhaps more than anyone, Helen Viola Jackson sensed its recentness. In 2020, Jackson, the final surviving widow of a Civil War veteran, passed away. She had married her late husband when he was already in his 90s, so to be fair, she was 101 years old. Jackson's father requested her to do some cleaning for James Bolin every day on her way home from school when she was a teenager in Missouri in the 1930s. Bolin was an old widower who was a soldier in the 14th Regiment of the Missouri Cavalry, serving on the Union side. He didn't appreciate being a charity case, even though he accepted the assistance. Eventually, he made Jackson an offer that was essentially a business pitch. If you marry me, you will receive my military pension upon my passing. It was during the Depression and times were hard, Jackson subsequently told historian Hamilton C. Clark. It might be my only means of getting off the property, he replied. On September 4th, 1936, when Jackson was 17 and Bolin was 93, the two were married. She continued to live at home, maintained her last name, and concealed her marriage. The scandalous nature of their age difference was the primary cause of this. I had great respect for Mr. Bolin, and I did not want him to be hurt by the scorn of wagging tongues, she said in 2018. Jackson also refrained from claiming her husband's pension following his death in 1939 due to the possibility of tongue wagging. She said she didn't want to be seen as some kind of gold digger and that one of Bolin's daughters had threatened to tarnish her reputation. Story 26. For roughly as long as we have known Pluto the dwarf planet, we have also known Pluto the cartoon character. February 1930 saw the discovery of the planet. Only a few months later, the dog made its premiere in Disney's animated short, The Chain Gang. He didn't have a name in the movie, and he was nicknamed Rover when he made a comeback that year in another short, The Picnic. In 1931's The Moose Hunt, Rover was renamed Pluto. Although there has long been conjecture that the planet served as the inspiration for the name, no one can be certain of this. In Cartoon Monikers, an insight into the animation industry written by Walter Brash, Disney director Ben Sharpstein stated, "We thought Rover was too common, so we had to look for something else. I honestly can't recall why we changed it to Pluto the Pup." Story 27. Most likely your early years are long gone. Even if this final revelation isn't particularly new, it might make you feel older. 41 years have passed since 1982. For the sake of this mental exercise, let's assume that you were born in 1972. In 2022, you are discussing your early recollections of 1982 with a 10-year-old, watching E.T. in cinemas, listening to Eye of the Tiger every time you switch on the radio, etc. That's about the same as a 50-year-old in 1982, teaching you at age 10 all there is to know about 1942, Glenn Miller, Casablanca, World War II. Do you feel old yet?